that we are nearing the end of the calendar year because the prestige movies are starting to emerge. I hesitate to use the term Oscar bait, but that's kind of what's starting to happen. Those films that are designed to highlight the artistic vision of the studios and the people involved in order to garner some kind of award prestige. And I don't necessarily think Oscar baiting is a bad thing in and of itself, because without that, some of these smaller films and some of these fairly important films probably would never get made, especially in today's blockbuster comic book movie dominated landscape. There's a lot of competition for screens and trying to get people into the theaters or to even watch a movie. So I think now more than ever there is a purpose and an upside to, again, Oscar baiting. Again, not a term I'm really comfortable with, but I don't quite know what else to call it. The downside to that is that in an attempt to win an award, what you will often find is that certain types of movies tend to follow a very specific pattern. They know what has won awards in the past, and not so much copying that formula, but sticking to that formula is a proven way of getting your film out there and your studio name out there and attaching some prestige to, or some perceived prestige to, your project and your studio. And that is what I think of when I watched this movie. Is this film to me feels very much like an awards season film, because it's a smaller movie, much more ponderous than some, with Oscar-winning actors giving Oscar nominee performances in a film that is very similar to many, many, many films of its ilk. So much so that my ultimate feeling of this film is, why was it made? Because it really doesn't feel like it offers any new insight. So let's talk a little bit about Armageddon Time. So the film takes place in 1980, and our main point of view character is a young man by the name of Paul. He is entering 6th grade. He is the child of Jewish immigrants, or the child of Jewish immigrants, so a second-generation American. And of course, because it's one of these films, he's a little odd. He's a little outside the norm. All the teachers think he's slow, but he's not. He's just more emotionally tuned than his classmates. He befriends a young black student in his class who has been left back the previous year. And they strike up, an unlikely friendship, and both have very different home lives, but both are equally difficult and traumatic in their own way. The young black student, who I think his name was Michael, so I'm going to call him Michael, even if that is not the character's name. I think that was his name. So Michael, his guardian is his grandmother, who is suffering from, I believe it's Alzheimer's. I never say it out loud, but that's kind of the implication that's given. So she can't really give him the care and looking after that he needs, and so he is acting out. Meanwhile, Paul has a more structured nuclear family complete with both sets of grandparents and aunts and uncles and a brother, but he still feels as though he is the outsider in his own family. His father is emotionally distant and physically abusive, and the only person in his family whom he seems to have any kind of real bond with is his grandfather, played by Anthony Hopkins. And at some point, due to circumstances and due in part to his friendship with Michael, his family eventually whisk him off to a private school, which brings about one of the most bizarre and jarring character introductions in the last couple years, as far as I'm concerned. This was one that I was like, wait, is that? No. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. But basically what we have here is the idea of a coming-of-age story of a young man looking at the politics of the world as an adult versus the politics of the world seen through the eyes of a child, someone who has an artist sensibility and sees the world a little differently and doesn't want to follow in this rigid path that everyone else has set out for him, and every time he strays from it, he gets smacked down, in some cases literally. But he's encouraged to keep fighting and to not let the bastards win, and so on and so on and so on. My gut reaction to this film is that it is not a bad movie. It's not bad. It has its upsides. Most predominantly, of course, it is another brilliant performance by Sir Anthony Hopkins. But is that really a surprise? At this point, if you have Anthony Hopkins in your movie, I mean, you're kind of expecting a brilliant performance, and he doesn't disappoint. Matter of fact, I will go so far as to say that his performance is the highlight of the film. When his character is on screen and is talking, it is captivating. And you can certainly see why Anthony Hopkins and his character are kind of the emotional centerpiece of the entire film. No other performance or storyline can match up to his. And what makes Anthony Hopkins just quietly brilliant is that he is quietly brilliant. He's not doing anything majestic or scene stealing, or he's not mugging for the camera. He's just acting, just pure acting, and he's just so damn good that when he's telling these stories about his parents fleeing Poland, and the life he had to lead, or he's giving his son or his grandson a pep talk, it just feels so real. It's so natural, and it's you are just sucked in. Anytime he is on screen, it's Anthony Hopkins. I don't know what else to say, but you can't escape the fact that every time he's on screen, you can just see that Wayne's World thing blinking at the bottom, Oscar clip, Oscar clip, Oscar clip. And if it was, it's well deserved. It's a great performance, but he is exactly the type of character in a movie like this that you'd expect. He's the wise grandfather who sees the world the way he wants to and can tell you the truth because he's old and he's going to die. Spoiler alert, but I don't think it's that big of a spoiler in a movie like this. When a young man has an older relative or friend as a mentor, you pretty much know that person is going to die, because now the question is, can that young person take the lessons that they have learned and become a functioning adult? Another great performance, and I'm sorry, I should have looked this up before I got in the car, and I didn't. But the young man who plays Michael is quite good. A very strong performance by him. And the young man who plays Paul is not too bad. I don't think he's as strong as Michael is, but he holds his own in scenes with Anthony Hopkins. So I think that speaks to his ability. So the young actors are quite good and do a good job of providing you with a good emotional core for the film. That being said, there's just not much else I can really recommend about this film, because there's not that much that's really different about it. It is your traditional boy becomes a man narrative about someone, an outsider with a different view of the world, being told to be one way but knowing he has to be another, and trying to find the balance. I mean, there are a dozen other movies like this, and that is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing that the same story gets told multiple times. You know, part of the interesting thing about stories is not so much that there are brand new ones, but the different ways in which we tell them. And I just don't feel that this one is unique enough. The only thing it's really unique in is its ugliness. It is a fairly ugly and unforgiving look at life, basically sending you the message that life is crap and ugly and unhappy, and everyone's going to try to keep you down, and everyone's going to try to tell you, you know, that this is this, and you can try to be friends with people, but society won't like it, and, you know, society won't like you, and it's just, and I get it. I really do. I am not a naive Pollyanna, despite what people might think. You know that the world is ugly, and the world is broken, and the world has, you know, very unhappy things in it. But I guess maybe I am a Pollyanna in that I want to believe that even with those ugly things, there is still the hope and the beauty, and that you can maybe overcome those things. And I think this film is trying to tell that story, but it just gets very, very marred down in the sheer brutality of it. For instance, the father character, who is a hot-tempered man who beats his kids with a belt as a form of discipline. And I feel like the film is trying very hard to not paint him into the corner of a villain and make him your traditional abusive father, because he does have some good scenes in there, especially when Paul gets caught towards the climax of the film, gets caught doing something. I don't know why I'm hiding it. He and Michael attempt to steal a computer from Paul's private school and fence it so they can run away to Florida. They get caught, and Michael takes the fall for Paul, and that rhymes. And, of course, Paul's father comes and gets him, and you assume that because he got beat for a relatively minor offense earlier in the film, that it's now going to get even worse, but instead they have a heart-to-heart. So it's trying to show him not in a bad light, but I don't know if it really succeeds in its attempt to paint him as a complex three-dimensional person, because it's still, the film is seen from Paul's point of view, and he still sees the person as an ugly human being, not unjustly, I should stress. But I also need to stress this, and this is going to sound so bad. I am not ever a proponent of beating a child, but I will say this. Paul is not a good kid. You know, he is disrespectful to his parents. He's disrespectful to his mother. He deliberately gets up in the middle of dinner because he doesn't want to eat whatever it is she's cooked for him because he doesn't like the name of it, and calls a Chinese restaurant even though everyone's telling him not to, and he does it like, you know, in a very like snotty way. It's kind of like Calvin and Hobbes, you know. Yeah, I would not say beat him for that, but I will say he's not a good kid. He's not a good person in his own right. I also feel that in some ways, while the film tries to be even-handed, the film is also very unforgiving in other ways, which I think it should have been more even-handed in. For instance, and it tries to do this with Anthony Hopkins' character, but I don't think it really sticks the landing. Of course, Paul is an artist, and that's what he wants to be, and of course, everyone is telling him, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, you know, you need to go to business school, you need to be a businessman, and all of this. And the way it's kind of framed is, again, it's kind of like a musical biopic. You know, the parents telling the kid, "You're never gonna make it, Billy." And Anthony Hopkins tries to explain to him that as the children of immigrants, education, knowledge, you know, being successful, that is what was important. That was the American dream in those times, and that when they're not trying to squash his dream, they are trying to make sure that he is taken care of later in life, which can feel like your dream is being squashed, but for parents of that era, and even parents now, you know, that is, you know, that is them trying to be good parents. It's kind of like I've always felt, getting off on a little bit of a tangent here, in James Cameron's Titanic, I always felt like the mother character, Rose's mother, was always given kind of a raw deal and always judged very unfairly as a character because she wanted her daughter to marry wealthy and be taken care of, you know, as opposed to having her run away with a poor kid and live under a bridge. Well, what a terrible mother to want her child to not go hungry. You know, she wasn't trying to be cruel. She was trying to be a good parent as she defined that role. And I don't know, it just feels, I think the film tries, again with the Anthony Hopkins character, to walk that line and try to explain that mode of thinking, but I don't know if it ever really does it. Everyone in Paul's life still except for Anthony Hopkins, still feels like some kind of bully or overbearing person or abusive person. So that his life is just a never-ending stream of ugliness and discomfort. And I know that is the life for some people. I understand that. You know, not everything is rosy and, you know, happy and joyful. It just makes it very unpleasant to watch. You know, especially when you don't feel like there's much of a point to it all, other than the point that's already been made a dozen other times in a dozen other movies. You want a real example of just how negative this film is? You know who are actual characters in this movie? Like, out of fucking nowhere, to the point that I had to go and look it up. Donald Trump's parents are characters in this movie. They are benefactors of the private school that Paul and his brother are sent to, and he has an encounter with Trump's father in the hall, who tells him about tradition, and you gotta live up to tradition and all this, you know, basically browbeats the kid for no real reason. And then in one of the most bizarre cameos, or I don't know what you'd call it, that I can recall in a while, Jessica Chastain gets up as Trump's mother
and delivers this speech to the kids about how you're going to earn what you get and it's not going to be handed to you, and obviously the whole reason that this is here is it is pointing out the hypocrisy of the entire situation, that Paul is the child of immigrants who have had to fight and have had to work and have had to battle for everything they have, being told by, Trump's mother that, people at this school aren't going to be handed anything. So obviously it's there to highlight that point and the hypocrisy of the entire situation. But it is still so fucking bizarre. And there are these two kids that Paul meets at the school, and it's heavily implied that this is a young Trump. Which, look, I have no objection to any film taking a shot at Trump. I say bring it on. We need more shots at him. And I mean that in terms of satirical shots, so don't anybody flag me. But it was just such a bizarrely specific character to put in there. I was just totally taken aback by it. I was like, wait, what? So I did some research. I was like, yeah, that's supposed to be Trump's mother. If for no other reason, then it's hard to imagine Trump having a mother. I always assumed that he was once an elf who was corrupted by Sauron's magic and was reborn in the mud by Saruman as an Orakai. To think that he actually had a mother at some point, that's just crazy to me. I'm off topic, and I feel like I'm rambling a lot in this review. Could be because it's very early in the morning at the time I'm recording it. I think it all comes back to that original hypothesis or thesis that I put forward, and that is that this film is not bad. It's well made, it's decently directed, and the actors do a good to amazing job depending on where they're at. And I also think it is trying to paint a realistic picture of what it really means to try to go for that quote-unquote American dream. So I don't feel like this is a bad movie, but I also don't feel like it is particularly memorable or particularly good at what it does. I feel that it focuses so much on the ugliness and the negativity of everything. And I get that is the tone the film is trying to present, that Paul, despite all of this ugliness and despite all of the bad things that have happened to him and that he's seen, he's not going to let it corrupt him. He's going to still go for his dreams, and he's not going to let the bastard win, as his grandfather tells him. It's just, I don't know. It's just, the whole thing is, when I watch a movie like this, I can forgive a lot of ugliness, and if you feel like there is that Rocky-esque beacon of hope, that there is, that you're going to come out the other side. I don't mind ugliness if you feel like the characters can come out the other side, because then you feel there's a purpose to the ugliness. While this movie does do that, I don't think it does it strongly enough. It still feels fairly, I don't know, it just feels unpleasant. It was not enjoyable to watch, except for the scenes with Anthony Hopkins. Those were phenomenal. But everything else, and again, it's so very similar to every other movie of this type. You can mark the stock characters and tropes, on your coming of age story and pick a time period bingo card. So I don't know. Again, it's not terrible, but I don't think it's really anything special. But I know it's going to get a big push for the Oscars. Okay, again, I'm sorry. This review rambled, and I don't feel like it was one of my best. I don't know if I really have processed this movie as much as I could have, but it's about the best we're going to do at this point. So let's wrap this up. So final grade for Armageddon Time, I'm going a C, just a basic C. I want to push it more for the performance of Anthony Hopkins, but Anthony Hopkins is good at anything, and you can see him in much better movies. So there you have it. So maybe check it out if you want to be a award season completist, but I don't think you're really going to miss anything if you let this one go. So there you have it. Okay, so again, kind of a tired and not very well focused review to start the day off, but you know, they all can't be gems. They all, you know, Becca can't be here for all of them yet. But anyway, thank you for coming along with me. Thank you for listening to me as I ramble incoherently about this movie. And take care, and as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.